Hello, and welcome again to my show, Searching for Integrity. My name really is John Smith, and I'm searching for people with integrity. Why? Because our country suffers from IDD, Integrity Deficit Disorder. We have our guest today, Robert Bob Crease, the author of his book, The Leak, launched last October, the end of October, almost 30 days now, Bob. Uh, and that's good. End of October. I'm looking about this. I really looked over the materials that they gave me, and you have a lot to talk about, I think, about your book. And you can begin wherever you'd like to begin.
Yes, thank you, John. And yes, the book is very much about integrity. And the book, and again, the book, as you said, came out actually not very long ago, just about 2 or 3 weeks ago. But it's about how a small leak of a non-hazardous material created a firestorm that brought in its wake the firing of a contractor at a national laboratory, the closing of a major facility, and the calls to close the lab itself. Now, the lab, stop me if you want more information, but the lab itself is Brookhaven National Laboratory, which is one of the first 3 national laboratories that was built after the war. It was built to house scientific instruments that were too big for individual institutions or universities to afford. So, and right after the war, these were research reactors and particle accelerators. So Brookhaven was one of these, one of the first 3, and it was built on Long Island, not too far from New York City, the middle of Long Island, by 9 universities who in the Northeast who came together to do it. Mm-hmm. And one of their instruments was a reactor, which was used for research purposes. Now, let me say first that there's an important difference between power reactors and research reactors. They're very different in structure and in size. Power reactors are 30, 40 times as big as research reactors. Now, research reactors produce large quantities of 2 things. They produce heat and neutrons. And power reactors use the heat, take the heat and use it to generate energy and throw away the neutrons. Research reactors throw away the heat and use the neutrons for scientific purposes. They study material, they study the structure of materials, they study the structure of biological forms of life, they create medical isotopes, isotopes used for medical diagnosis and treatment and so forth. And so the structure and size are very different. Now, in 1997, there was a small leak of tritium-containing material. Tritium is a form of hydrogen that it's a form of radiation that's relatively safe. Its rays can be stopped by a single piece of paper. And it's used in self-eliminating exit signs and so forth. It's hydrogeologists put it in the water to trace ground flow and so on. But the laboratory, the spent fuel pool of this reactor was found to be leaking it. And the announcement of that leak in January of 1997 created a political media activist firestorm that wound up closing this reactor and calls to close the lab itself. So that's what the book is about, this leak. Now, the connection to integrity is that the danger of the leak was blown all out of proportion. I mean, and I wrote it because at the time I was finishing a book on the history of the first 25 years of the laboratory at the time, and suddenly these events began unfolding around me. And at first, I considered briefly writing a book about them, but I thought nobody would believe it. Conspiracy theories damaging science, people not believing in science, depending on whether it supports their agendas or not. All the active politicians caving to celebrities. I mean, I just thought this was too weird. And then 25 years later, I changed my mind, because this what happened in 1997 is like the canary in the coal mine for the events of today. And you can see this all happening in this one particular story.
Well, I made some notes as I was going through the materials I was given. And the first thing, once I figured it out, which didn't take long, but I wrote down much ado about nothing. And then I thought, who was it that stirred the pot? But then how many are there, you know?
Yeah, well, there's, you can, the book is about how does this announcement of nothing, a leak that's not a health danger or environmental danger, doesn't get into drinking water, how does it create a firestorm? And in a way, that's the puzzle of the book. And part of it is that it fell into a very hypersensitive environment. I mean, people have fears, and understandable fears, about radiation. And Chernobyl had taken place less than 10 years beforehand. No, just about 10 years beforehand, 1986. 3 Mile Island was 1979, you know, and who knows what, you know, the lab was not entirely innocent. They hadn't detected this leak for about a dozen years. Still, in this hypersensitive environment, the danger was blown all out of proportion. And it's, and you say, who stirred the pot? Well, the celebrities partly stirred the pot. Politicians who wanted environmental credentials stirred the pot. Activists with anti-nuclear agendas stirred the pot. And so you have all, you know, it's a way like a perfect storm, to change the metaphor. All of these people coming together created this thing that was damaging to scientific process.
Well, it sounds very similar to what we've gone through the last 2-3 years, COVID.
Right. And here's why it's important. Here's why integrity is important, because if you think about the key existential issues facing the planet nowadays in the 21st century, pandemics, global warming, toxins, rising seas, and so forth, to deal with them, all require science. They all have a scientific dimension to them. So being able to understand what the science is saying and to incorporate it into policy is very important. So that's why the story is important.
Right. That became, I would imagine, it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and of course that probably put goosebumps on your arms for a long while. I look at certain things whenever I go through the materials, and one of the things that I do is I analyze in my own way that I can as best, with you helping me, the contents. And that tells me basically what your book is going to be. What's it going to be about? The first item that I've looked at is not the leak discovered. That much I could figure out. But number 2 is sacked. What was sacked?
Well, that's I can understand the question, but when the laboratory was built in 1947, it was run, as I said, by a group of 9 universities who collaborated in building it. However, they needed a contractor to contract with the government so that they could take the government's money, but run the laboratory like a university. You know, so they didn't want to run it like the post office or the TVA. They wanted to run it with the independence of a university and not be, and have the scientists not be civil servants. So, and that contractor was called AUI, Associated Universities, Inc. And they ran the laboratory, Brookhaven, for 50 years. So that was another part that I forgot to mention. The laboratory was 50 years old in 1997. So they expected this wonderful celebration of this laboratory that had won 4 Nobel Prizes, which is more than any other laboratory in the world in the same time period. So AUI was beginning to mount this celebration. But after the leak was announced, the Department of Energy, which was very sensitive about its reputation, decided to fire the contractor, to fire AUI. And they ambushed the laboratory because they didn't tell the laboratory what they were going to do. And the Secretary of Energy at the time showed up at the laboratory on May 1st, 1997, and announced that he was firing the contractor. So that was the AUI was the group being sacked. And so that episode, that particular chapter that you mentioned is about the events leading up to that, which were pretty dramatic.
Right. Well, I would think that that kind of event would cause, I guess, a chaotic summer for that comes next. And is that correct?
Yes, it was chaotic because the announcement that the Department of Energy assumed that terminating the contractor and announcing the competition for a new one would calm the politicians and the activists. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it did the opposite. Because when you have the Department of Energy canceling the contract, and this was the first time in its history, people understandably thought, wow, the lab must really be a danger to the community. So you had protests every day at the lab gate, and laboratory employees had to drive through these protesters dressed in like mushroom clouds and skeletons. They would the laboratory employees, when they would stop at gas stations, that there were signs on their cars that identified them as lab employees, and they were accused of being killers and damagers of the environment. And then there were episodes that were that were just so strange that it's hard to believe. Like one, I told you that tritium was used in exit signs, self-illuminating exit signs. Mm-hmm. Well, 10 days after the announcement of the AUI firing, a New Jersey youth, high school student, after a prom, went to a landfill. He was probably had consumed a little bit. Went to a landfill, found one of these exit signs, broke it open, thought it was really cool looking, broke it up open, and wound up ingesting tritium. Then noticed the radioactive sign, went to his doctor. His doctor examined him and found that his pee had a higher concentration of tritium than the plume itself at Brookhaven, for which the Department of Energy had just fired the contractor. But the doctor rightly said, "You're safe, there's nothing wrong," and asked the kid just to drink enough water and pee it out. So there's that. That's it's hard to believe that this could happen.
Not much logic in that.
No, and then there were other things that summer, like the editor of a local newspaper wrote that he had found a time machine in the lab, and that the lab was about to give birth to dinosaurs and 40-foot spiders that would be seized by a UFO. And he thought that people would realize that he was spoofing the media and the activist account of what was happening at the lab. So the next week but not enough people were realized it was a spoof. So the next week he had to write an article saying, "Look, if you close Brookhaven, this will be the greatest damage to U.S. science that we've had."
Right. I can see that, and I can see in chapter 4, blowing in the wind. That must be Bob Dylan.
Well, that comes from a statement by an environmentalist that to make politicians be on your to make politicians go, you have to politicians are like weather vanes. That's the quote. You have to get them moved. You have to create a wind to blow them. So that's quoting Dylan, but that's what the reference is to, because the activists very successfully created enough wind to blow the politicians.
Interesting. Of course, that's been going on now from that period to the end of a turbulent year. How many years is that at that point?
That's just 1 year.
Oh, really?
The leak is announced in January of 1997. The Department of Energy cancels the AUI's contract on May 1st, 1997. The politicians start to try to close the reactor in September of 1997.
Right.
And but the leak is finally completely stopped at the very end of the year. So that's 1997, the 50th anniversary of this laboratory, of this world famous laboratory, is 1997 is the turbulent year.
Wow. Now, following that, no respite.
The activists, meanwhile, had formed a very powerful, well-funded anti-nuclear group based in the Hamptons on Long Island, this wealthy enclave. And they, even though the leak was stopped, the contractor had been fired, they set out to make sure that the reactor was closed. And they began to stage a series of events attacking the lab at the beginning of the next year. So that's what no respite means.
I see.
So even though there was a new the new contractor took over, well, the contract was signed January of 1998, and they took over March 1st, 1998 as well too. They still faced the same kind of opposition that this anti-nuclear group had been exerting the previous year.
Right. And then SCRAMMED?
SCRAMMED is a technical term, meaning it's what happens when you suddenly shut down a reactor in an emergency. So, if the reactor's operating and there's a little glitch, you suddenly push the scram button and it closes down. It's a safety device, but it means stop the entire thing. It's like an emergency button. So scrammed means so the chapter SCRAMMED is all about how the end of the reactor, the death of the reactor. And what happened was that the reactor, there was an environmental impact statement, and that for restarting the reactor. And the outcome was supposed to, whether the reactor was to be turned on or not, was supposed to depend on the outcome of this environmental impact statement. And in fact, the environmental impact statement was the draft statement said that there was no danger in reopening this research reactor. But under pressure from this activist group, whose most prominent members were Alec Baldwin and Christy Brinkley, the Department of Energy Secretary Bill Richardson decided to terminate the reactor. And he did so. That too was an ambush. He didn't tell the laboratory he was doing that. Laboratory employees learned about it from the newspapers. So that's why that chapter is entitled SCRAMMED.
I see. That's probably something you don't do, I would guess, especially.
Well, it means you've got an emergency.
Yeah.
It means you're not closing the reactor for for maintenance or anything. It means something's gone wrong, so you kill it.
Right. There's a sentence I wrote or underlined in the prologue. Then and now we found many of the unfolding events to be like the plot twists in some outrageous tragicomedy whose spectrum of vivid characters ranged from cultivated to clownish. That would grab me.
Yes, it is like working on the story. It did seem like a novel at times. You have strong characters, you have celebrities, you have celebrities on TV shows. It's
right.
It was quite a story.
Yeah, we've had our own with the that we see on TV a lot of, and that would be Dr. Fauci, and he's done the COVID in the U.S. and the people. I don't know. I have a million adjectives that I'd throw at tomatoes and things like that. What's your view of that in terms of one individual in charge of CDC or and then reporting directly to the president at one time? Is that somewhat of the similar?
Well, if you have a conspiracy theory that's big enough, it may run into contrary evidence, and you have to create distrust in that evidence to make the conspiracy theory work. So if you believe that the election is being stolen, you have to say, well, those voting machines must be somebody must have hacked those voting machines, or there must be some cheating involved. Otherwise, your conspiracy theory doesn't make any sense. So, right. and so if you believe that the climate is not warming and the seas are not rising, then you have to claim that the scientists who say that they are corrupt somehow. So, and that's what happened on Long Island in 1997. In truth, the water was not the water was not polluted, as the activists said, but the local the Suffolk County Water Authority. That meant that the activists had to claim that the Suffolk County Water Authority was not right. But the Suffolk County Water Authority was a very reputable organization, and they were, they were horrified that that they were being subject to suspicion, and so they ran advertisements saying, "Look, don't believe those reports. Your water is safe." So that's what I'd say is similar. Is that conspiracy theorists are having to cast suspicion on reputable scientists and reputable institutions.
Right. Another statement that I saw: how the discovery of harmless leak of radiation sparked a media firestorm, political grandstanding, and fearmongering that closed a vital scientific facility. That sounds to me like, no, not supposed to do that.
No, and it's harmful to public safety and environmental health and safety as well too. I mean, we have a stake. There are stakes here. If you tell people that the water is polluted when it's not, if you tell people that a certain operation of a reactor is if you say that cancer is higher in a certain area when it's not, then your view of what your perspective on what's healthy and what's safe it begins to get skewed.
I read all your reviews; they're very good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And where can people buy your book? Where do you find you if they want to contact with you?
Well, I hope the book is all over the internet, but okay. If it's not, I'm at robertpcrease.com. And the book is put out by MIT Press, but you can you can, MIT Press, has connections with lots of people, and I'm hoping you can find the book in your local bookstore.
I'm sure that your publicist is doing the best she can.
Yes, she's very good.
Yes, I understand that too. I want to thank you for being on our show. This is good scientific stuff, and a lot of people are going to lap it up, and then the ones that don't lap it up, they'll be asking questions.
Well, thank you, John, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about the book. I mean, as you said, it just came out, and so my head has been, involved in writing the book, and now I can just talk about it.
Right. Well, I want to thank my listeners to tune in to Searching for Integrity, and so long and happy trails to all.